The 56th annual meeting of the Board of Governors of the African Development Bank and the 47th annual meeting of the African Development Fund, the concessional arm of the bank group for 2021, which started on the 23rd of June, ends today, the 25th of June, with over 3,000 participants, including finance ministers, central bank governors, policymakers, representatives of civil servant group, heads of international organizations, business leaders from the bank's group members who joined virtually. The meeting focused on building resilient economies in post-COVID-19 Africa. Professor Kevin Urama, Senior Director of the African Development Institute at the African Development Bank, shares some highlights from the meetings. Thank you so much for joining us, Prof.
Thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome. Well, it's become obvious that rebuilding any economy at all at this time depends largely on the spread of inoculation. The AFDB president, in one of his speeches, said that Africa should not be begging for vaccine. Well, what is the bank doing towards this, helping Africa to become vaccine independent at this time?
The African Development Bank has been doing quite a lot since the onset of the pandemic to support African countries' capacity to respond to the pandemic in several ways. As you know, the bank has supported countries with up to $4 billion to help in procuring medical supplies and also vaccines to help to fill that gap on the continent. And the bank is also working on a strategy to help with building pharmaceutical industries on the continent, to help Africa to produce vaccines, produce its own vaccines. At the moment, Africa produces less than 1% of the vaccines that it needs. And that is why you see that we have not been prepared to address the pandemic. At the moment, we have only about 0.6% of African adults who are fully vaccinated. And you would agree with me, this is not good for the continent because it means we will not be able to reach herd immunity quickly to be able to bring back economic activities on the continent. So the bank is working with the AU and other agencies to be able to help Africa in this direction. Thank you.
Well, when you say only 26% of Africans have been vaccinated, is the problem the availability of vaccine or skepticism by Africans to get vaccinated?
From what we're seeing, the availability of vaccines is one of the major problems in many countries. And you're right, there's also vaccines skepticism, but I wouldn't put the low rate of vaccination on the continent to the latter issue that you have raised. So we still have many Africans who are willing to get vaccinated, but the vaccines are not available to them. And in some places, they may not be affordable to them. And this is why this particular year, we have focused on vaccine justice, trying to mobilize support for African countries to be able to access the amount of vaccines required to vaccinate our people.
Well, the first event on debt resolution and growth, the road ahead for Africa, brought together leading experts, including the president of the African Development, the managing director of IMF, the managing director of WTO, and many ministers from several continents to discuss the subject. Why focusing on that at this time, and what were the major take-home from that meeting?
Yeah, the reason for the focus on addressing the debt question on the continent is very obvious, because addressing debt issues means addressing the issues of development on this continent. As you know, even before COVID-19, the debt challenge on the continent was already rising, with several countries heading towards a debt sustainability challenge. So the bank has mobilized to develop a debt action plan to be able to help African countries to build capacity to address several aspects of the debt challenge, starting from domestic resource mobilization to budget planning and management, public financial management, and also all areas of improving transparency and accountability in the public finance management system. For example, one of the key areas that all the panelists have and speakers, including our own ministers and governors, have come up with is the need to enhance debt transparency on the continent. there is need for the continent to be more transparent with regard to what is borrowed, where it is borrowed from, the terms of the borrowing, and what it's being used for. Because if we do this, it is going to help in doing one of the core reasons we are focused on this, which is to make debt work for Africa, to improve debt productivity on the continent, to align what we borrow to projects, our national development policies and plans and projects, to ensure that it's being invested in productive investments that is able to generate the returns required for repaying the debt, and not leaving it for the future generations to be able to make the payments. So one of the other areas of recommendations that has come out of the meeting is also strengthening institutional capacity to be able to address the public financial management system all through the cycle, like I have mentioned, starting from how much resources revenue we're generating in our countries. And following that, there's a recommendation for digitization and e-governance. This will create the transparency we need and the confidence that both donors and borrowers need in order to be able to help to increase the amount of resources that are generated through domestic resource mobilization, and also be able to track the use and plug illicit financial flows through which Africa is losing over $88 billion annually. This is about 3.7% of GDP, of Africa's GDP. So you can imagine if we're able to track and plug that hole, we will be able to reduce the debt challenge on the continent already very significantly. But again, we have, yes, go ahead.
Are there other countries you're working with, you know, that you are focusing with all of this action plan that you're working with immediately?
Many African countries, up to 18 African countries, are already having debt sustainability challenges. And as African Development Bank, we focus on all countries of the continent, depending on the demand we receive from them, the requests we receive from countries. So we are not prioritizing any specific country, but we will focus on addressing the needs of the countries as they come. So there is no particular focus on specific countries at the moment. But generally, there are general issues that the continent needs to address in order to improve the public financial management system. One of those key issues is governance. We need legal reforms to make our legal architecture more transparent, to strengthen oversight institutions so that we're able to actually track corruption and track the issues of illicit financial flows that I have mentioned already before. And also strengthening the institutional capacity in all aspects of public financial management, as I have already talked about. And another thing is, as our sister, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala mentioned during her speech, during the event, the best way to actually have a good public financial management is to grow economies. So we need to a very prudential macroeconomic policy management. Now we have fiscal discipline, monetary policy discipline, foreign exchange discipline. And if we're able to do these effectively, we will be able to help Africa quite strongly in addressing the challenges of debt on the continent. So prudent management of fiscal and monetary policy is key. Prudent financial and capital, deepening financial and capital markets to spur growth on the continent is key. This is like the hen that lays the egg, the golden egg. So we shouldn't be focusing only on debt sustainability, but also on how we build the real economy on the continent to be able to generate the resources we need for our economies and be able to avoid the borrowing that leads to the debt challenge on the continent. One key point I want to make again is the issue of policy independence, allowing our central banks, monetary policy, fiscal policy, and foreign exchange policies to have the independence it requires to be able to deliver productive outcomes for the continent.
All right, Prof. Thank you so much for sharing the highlights and the actionable steps from the AFDB 56th meeting. And do have a lovely weekend. Professor Kevin Urama is the Senior Director, African Development Institute, AFDB, and he was just telling us some highlights from the meeting that was concluded today. Thank you so much, Prof.